Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Inkwell Academy. My name is Sophia Wardell, and today we have a very special guest, award-winning young adult fiction author, Kate Stollenwerck. Kate Stollenwerck is an attorney turned award-winning author. Kate is the author of the novels Don't Let Me Down and Hello Goodbye. Kate is also the recipient of the Florida Book Award's Gold Medal for Young Adult Fiction and the Writers League of Texas Discovery Prize for Young Adult Middle Grade Fiction. Thanks for joining us today, Kate.
Great. I'm happy to be here.
We're happy to have you. And today I want to discuss writing young adult fiction with you. So I want to kind of
Mhm.
start with exploring the past. With both of your novels, they involve uncovering long hidden family secrets. What
Mhm.
typically draws you to those themes of intergenerational connections and unearthing the past? And what, in your opinion, could a young adult reader take away from these revelations?
So I think I was a history major in college. I've always been fascinated by the past and how it instructs and informs the present. I do think that the stories of our grandparents and our parents and our ancestors live within us. They're in our bones. And in some ways, we don't even know it until later in life. A personal story for me is I wrote this novel. I've always been attracted to books. My dad was a big reader, but I never thought about it beyond that. I don't have creatives in my family. And I was inspired to write, and I wrote this novel. And then when I went to publish, my father told me my grandmother in the 50s had sent manuscripts off to New York from this little bitty town in Texas. She never heard back. Back then, women being writers in the 50s was really unheard of.
Mm,
And it just kind of sparked something in me. And it made me go, okay, maybe this is coming from somewhere I didn't even know, like it's in my
right.
DNA. And I do think, as we live in this world that is crazy and stressful, and I think we're seeing a resurgence of bigotry and hatred that we haven't seen in a long time. I've actually been very reflective on my book title, Don't Let Me Down, and feeling like we can't let the greatest generation down. They fought for democracy, they fought for freedoms, they fought for
Mm.
people to not be persecuted. And that's a little bit diving into the history of World War II in my books. I like to highlight potentially issues young people might not know about. And, for me, the historical issue I was really interested in was one, illuminating a little bit about the Nuremberg trials, which set the precedent for how we prosecute war crimes in the
Mm.
world, and also about the stolen art piece of World War II and how these cultural treasures are still missing. It is an active crime. These things, we just shouldn't forget about them. These families were destroyed. And it matters. It matters we find this art. It matters that these families are reunited with a piece of their history.
Yeah, that's amazing. And how impactful I find that the more authors I interview, the more I realize that, most of them really do play off history, and the importance of it. And just history is almost like a story in itself. It's fascinating. It just really is. And I want to talk a little bit about, you had touched on family, and just realistic relationships, especially when you're using your own family history. How do you
Mhm.
approach developing authentic relationships in your writing, especially ones that resonate with young adults?
Well, first, I have 3 teenagers, so I think I'm living a lot of that angst all over again. I have a 17-year-old daughter, a 14-year-old son, and a 12-year-old daughter. So I do think for the past 5 years when I've been writing, I really am day to day kind of back in that angsty, irrational emotional state of teenagers often. And so I do have teen readers that read my books, that are beta readers, that help me with language. Language is always interesting to me. Perception, with how, the shifting of popularity and what people value is very different than my generation. But I also think, you have to create flawed characters, right? Like, I think
Right.
that we are all flawed. And so it was really important to me, to show shifting perspectives. So, for example, I really believe, I can love someone and think they're the greatest person in the world. And to you, they are a terrible human being, right? Because we all have different relationships and flaws. And so for me, this multi generational storyline is the mother and the grandmother have a tense relationship. and the granddaughter and the grandmother connect in a way that is profound, right? And I also really think that turning 15, 16, 17 is really the first time you turn outside your family many times and have deep, meaningful relationships, whether it's a coach, a teacher, a grandparent, someone you work with, that influences you. And I also like to touch on themes of there can be people that are in your lives for a very finite amount of time that have a profound impact. And I think that that's the grandparent relationship.
Mm.
I don't know many people that don't have just, tears in their eyes or, this tenderness in their heart when they think about the role of a grandparent in their life. If they had a relationship, if they were close, generally it is a very beautiful, just relationship based in unconditional love. It doesn't have all of the complexities of the parent-child relationship, that really can can cause trauma, can hold us back from a pure emotional development. So that was kind of what I was exploring in the multi-generational relationship.
That's a great point. I really do love that. And I
Mhm.
feel like there's not a lot of novels I've personally read that do touch on that relationship or dive into it. And I think it's a great idea. And what about blending history with young adult fiction? What inspired you to bring these historical elements into a young adult context?
Yeah, I just felt like when I would talk to my kids and when I would talk to their friends, I think especially with social media, there's such an uh in a like it's just so easy to get lost in your little world, right? And
Mhm.
you're not curious about the world around you, the past. You can be sucked into Instagram or TikTok, but at the same time kids aren't reading, like reading levels are really down. And so I think you need to have contemporary storylines that they can relate to, yet pull them into the past. That's what I was hoping to do. I know pure historical novels sometimes do well, but a lot of times they don't. Kids don't want to read that if they're reading.
Right.
So I was really trying to create a normal teenager. To me, it was a little bit like Bella in Twilight, what I was trying to do with Haley, right? Bella is this great character because every teen girl that reads that can say that's me, right? Like I'm
Right.
Bella. Like she's normal, she has a normal life. There's not these crazy, circumstances of her life, and then you insert yourself in that story. I was trying to do that with Haley to, in a way, how I felt about Bella. Like I wanted teen girls or teen readers, to be able to insert themselves in this character's life. Okay, I can relate to that. I don't have this huge trauma that is unrelated, but I'm going to experience something for the first time, that is loss. And a lot of teenagers, a grandparent is the first loss they suffer. And
Mhm.
so trying to make the character relatable as far as she's worried about boys. Her mother drives her crazy. She doesn't know her place in the world, and she wants life to happen. She's waiting for something to happen to her. I remember feeling that like that in high school. So that was a little bit of what I was trying to relate, and then to a teen audience. So then you pull in a little bit of an adventure story, you pull in a little bit of mystery, and then you weave the history in.
Well, I really like that. And how would you say that you kept your teenager relatable while also having her go through this evolution of painful experiences through both books?
I think I kept her flawed, right? She's never
Mhm.
perfect. And I think that whether it's overreacting with her boyfriend, like she blocks him after one fight, it's very immature in a way, but that's how teenagers are. You're
Right.
you're you're operating off emotion. And I mean, I hear my daughter and her friends all the time be like, "Oh, I blocked him. I blocked her. I was mad at her." And so, but it's an immature reaction, but but it's a true to a teenager. I think also being a little selfish. Teenagers tend to only view the world through their eyes, and so I kept her. You kind of struggle with some of her selfish choices, but eventually she gets on that hero's journey, which I was trying to take her on, where she is evolving and she is seeing beyond her little world and her viewpoint. At the end, she's having to say, okay, Blake, I see your side now. I was wrong. And even with, understanding that her great grandfather, who was her, wanted to be her hero and disappointed her, but that's his journey. And we all have flaws, and, learning to accept the flaws of those we love. is ultimately the hardest thing, I think, in our most intimate relationships. We can forgive a total stranger more easily than we forgive someone we love the most in the world, because it's just
Right.
very hard when you have this deep love and emotion, you feel disappointment and you feel hurt. So that was for me, it was just making sure she wasn't perfect because I think none of us are.
Right. Well, that's a great point. And I do want to shift a little bit into location. How did you
Yes.
choose the location for your novels? And what would be your advice to young adult authors that are trying to set their story location?
So it takes place in Texas, the first book, and I'm from Texas. The second book takes place in Paris. So I obviously have never lived in Paris. So I'll explain a little bit of difference of that. First book, I think it's really important when you're starting out as a writer, at least for me, to write what you know. There's a familiarity. You can build your writing skills, but setting and world building is hard for some. And, I
Mhm.
find it challenging. So for me, it was being comfortable with knowing the environment and really being able to think about smells and weather and just the feel of the homes and that to me, even though I haven't lived in Texas in 20 years, Gigi's house, which is the grandmother in the first book, it was my great aunt's house. She's been passed away for 25 years, but I could literally walk you through room by room of that house, and that was very, visceral for me when writing, and I think important to make it authentic. Paris was interesting. I have been there. I was lucky enough, I've been there maybe 4 or 5 times. And, the internet is an incredible resource and it's wild. Like I had a couple of streets I knew I wanted to focus on, and I would go on YouTube and there would be a walking tour of the street. And I would be able to, really put myself on that street, look at the buildings, create that sense I was going to. And then it was historical research, really researching, okay, how do I describe the Haussmann building, the grand architecture of Paris for what it's known for, and like if I could do that, if I can describe, the dormered roofs and the Juliet balconies and the stone facade, we all know it now from Emily in Paris, but then you can kind of, I hope, imagine that part of Paris, and so it was really trying to get some of the defining characteristics, which also was doing a little bit of historical research on that city.
Well, Kate, thank you so much. That was wonderful insight on writing young adult fiction.
Thank you.
Lastly, Kate, where can our listeners find and connect with you?
Yes. So I'm mostly on Instagram and Facebook at Kate Stollenwerck author, but I also have a website, katestollenwerck.com.
That's all the time we have for today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's interview with award-winning young adult fiction author, Kate Stollenwerck. Be sure to check out our website for more videos. Wishing you all a fulfilling and successful writing journey.